Today I wanted to walk you through the high tide or low tide lab. So there's a couple ways to get to that lab. The first way is click on course materials, go to content, and then click through the pages of the module until you get to the high tide or low tide lab. The other thing you can do is you can just click on the module that it's in, and then you can scroll down till you find that assignment. You see it right here. I don't have a lot of information for that right now, but after I've made this video, I'll put whatever documents I work on during the video and also a link to the video there. And then as students ask questions, I'll have frequently asked questions and stuff like that there. So you can click here and you can see the instructions for the assignment are on page 6 of the module. So I'm just going to click on this and see what happens. So it's downloading a document, and it is right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at this document and see what's going on. The first thing it wants us to do is it wants us to go to the St. Simons Island tide table. So you can control click on this and it will take you there. Here we go. And then it just wants you to answer some questions about this information. Okay, so what is the interval between two successive high tides? In this one, they're looking for the time interval. So you might want to say in a certain number of hours. Usually, there is one high tide and one low tide a day, or you'll have two high tides and two low tides a day. So you'll have to check and see which one's happening at St. Simons. Okay? And then again, how many high tides per day? Is it 1 or 2? And how many low tides per day? 1 or 2. So you can look at this document and you can see that if this is the first day, we're having a high tide at these 2 times, and we're having a low tide at these 2 times. So that means there are 2 high tides and 2 low tides per day. Okay. Some days they might not have them because you can see that this is like at 11:07 p.m. and so this one is at like 12:01 a.m. So you can see that sometimes you won't have it just because of the way the times, the way they go with the day, but usually you'll have 2 high tides and 2 low tides a day, at least in Georgia. Now they want you to pick one high tide and find the next low tide that day. How long did it take for the tide to go out? And again, this should be in hours. And then pick one low tide and find the next high tide to go out, and it should be an hour. So for example, we have a high tide at 10:49 a.m., a high tide at a low tide at 4:40 a.m. So this is how our day is going to look, right? At 4:40 a.m. we'll have a low tide, and then at 10:49 a.m. we had a high tide, and then at 5:16 p.m. we have another low tide, and then at 11:07 p.m. we had another high tide. Okay, so we want to see the difference between these two. So 4:40 to 5:40, 5:40 to 6:40, 6:40 to 7:40, 7:40 to 8:40, 8:40 to 9:40, 9:40 to 10:40. So it looks like there were 6 hours and 9 minutes in between these two. Okay. So you can see there's about 6 hours between each tide. Let's go to the next one. 5:16 to 6:16, 6:16 to 7:16, 7:16 to 8:16, 8:16 to 9:16, 9:16 to 10:16, 10:16 to 11:16. Now you see it's 11:07. So it's actually, it's not fully 6 hours. It's going to be, let's see, math is not my strong suit, and I'm trying to do this in my head. 9:16, if we took away 10 minutes from that, that would be 07, so that's 11 minutes less, so that'd be 49 minutes, so 5 hours 49 minutes. between those two. Okay, I'll let you guys do, oops, looks like I already did it for you. Sorry about that. Are the two times the same? Which takes longer? Why? Okay. Okay, so the first time they're looking for this between a high tide and a low tide, and then a low tide and a high tide. So what I did is I actually did these numbers here, and then in this one's going to want high to low, so then it would be like that number, and then the next one was at, let's see, 11:07 p.m. and the next one was what, 5:26 a.m. So you can calculate the difference between these two. I'll let you guys do these two. Okay. Are the two times the same? Which takes longer? Why do you think that might be? And now that we want to use, we want to graph the level of the high tides in feet in a month. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take this information and I'm going to put it in a spreadsheet. And so I'm going to pause the video and then I'll come back once I've got it in my spreadsheet. And well, once I've opened up the spreadsheet program, and then I'll show you how I copy it in there. Okay, so I tried this and it worked, so I'm just going to show you what I did. I'm going to copy this entire table like this because it won't let me just copy the feet part. And then I'm just going to kind of place it in here, and then I will write in here the day, time, feet, time, feet, time, time, and then moon, place. Now let's look over here at the information it wants. So it just wants us to look at the high tide. So we can delete this. We can delete this. We can delete this. Okay. Graph the level of high tide in feet for a month. Complete the graph using a spreadsheet. Use your mouse and copy the title data. That's what we did. Place the data into a spreadsheet and then make a graph of the level of the high tide. Use a scatter plot, column plot, or line plot. Plot the days of the month along the bottom and the tide level along the vertical axis. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. In this one, we don't need the times, but we do have two tides. So there's two ways we can do it. We can make two separate graphs, or we could take the average of the two and make have one line on our graph. So if you want to take the average, here's how you'll do it. You'll take the you'll type in average. Okay, and then we will do these two, and that'll give you the average. Now you can click over here. When it becomes a plus sign, you can go all the way down and it'll calculate the average for all of your days. Okay, so you can choose which one you want to do. It doesn't matter. You can do two lines, or you can just do the average, or you can do all three if you want. Let's go ahead and get started with that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to Insert, and I'm going to choose a scatter plot because I think it's a little bit easier. And let's see. Maybe I should highlight my data before I do that. That makes sense, huh? So here, we'll go here. Click scatter plot. Here we go. Okay, now I'm going to click on this plus sign because I want to include the axis titles. Okay, oh, I don't want the data bars, that's a lot. And I don't need a legend. Okay, so here you can see this goes, and to make sure that we've got the right data on the right graph, you can see that this bottom one goes all the way up to like 35, which must mean that it's got the day on the bottom, which is exactly what we want. And then you can see the other number, the highest is, it caps out at 10, so all of our numbers are below 10, so that must be the high tide in feet. Okay, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to say I do want that legend. Okay, and I'm going to say that I'm going to edit these though. Maybe I will call this okay, so this is going to show us that we've got two different high tides, and then that gray one is our average. And then the reason we just have two out of here because, you know, we've got 2 days that don't have a tide. And that's just because it's that day's a little weird. The times, again, okay, so now that I've got this, I'm going to copy this graph and I'm going to put it in my lab. Okay. And then it's going to say what kind of patterns do this data reveal. Okay. Now here's what I'm going to do in this graph, just because I don't want you guys copying my graph. I want you to actually draw it yourself. I'm going to put an X through it. Just scribble it. That way you can't, you know, take my graph. Okay, I may blur it or something in the video, but I do want you guys to practice making the graph because I think it's important. So what kind of pattern does this reveal? And you can, the data is cyclical, right? Look at what's going on. It's high tide, and then the high tide is a little lower, and then the high tide gets higher, and then the high tide gets higher again. So it, if we had kept the moon in here, we probably could have seen that it would, you know, the high tides would get higher when the moon, you know, with the moon. So now you want to pick on your graph, you want to pick the date that has the highest high tide. So you can look on your graph or you can look on your data set, because, you know, you do have a data set. So you'll just want to see, you know, which day of the month has the highest high tide. Okay. And then you want to pick the date at the second highest high tide. You might want to see what phase of the moon. So let's say that I said the 18th, which is not right. Let's just say I said the 18th. Okay. The 18th is kind of halfway in between the last and the full moon, closer to the last of the moon. Okay. So you might, you know, you would write that. So you'll be able to take, you know, what you see in your graph, and you can look it up and see here. Okay. I'm just going to highlight these parts because they don't have question marks, so they might not be as easy for you guys to see them, that you need to do those, because I know when I'm doing an assignment I just look for all the question marks. Okay, from your graph, pick the date that has the lowest high tide. Again, you might pick the 31st, and then you could look and you could see that the 31st is, you know, a new moon or close to a new moon. And then you want to pick one that has the second to lowest trough on the curve for the lowest high tide. Now, if we're talking about a trough, let me draw in here just so you know what a trough is. So if this is our high tide data, these low parts are called the trough. So you want the one that has the second lowest. So not the very lowest one, but the second lowest one. Okay. What phase of the moon is associated with this high tide? And then part A says sketch the alignment of the sun and the earth at a new moon. Okay, so you want to save some space for that. Part B says sketch the alignment of the sun, moon, and earth at a full moon. From your sketches, which lunar phase would you expect to be associated with the high tide? Is this what you observe with your data? And then sketch the alignment of the moon at the first quarter moon or the last quarter moon. Okay? And then you just want to explain why the alignment results in lower tides. Okay, so I'm going to highlight where you need to sketch, and maybe I'll highlight that in another color, just so you know that that requires sketching. Okay, and then so hopefully this was kind of helpful. It kind of walks you through a little bit through this lab. So what I'm going to do for this lab, I'm going to give you guys this document, but this this graph that I have in here, I'm going to take it out because I want you to figure it out yourself. Okay. So when you guys download the document, you'll have everything I have in here. You just won't have the graph. I'll just have a space that says like graph goes here. I'll show you exactly what I'm going to write. Okay. I'm going to say your graph goes here. Okay. And I'll put this in an even different color. Wow, that's really bright. So again, hopefully this was helpful. And again, I'll put this document in the course resource newsletter right here. I'll also put a link to this website because I think it might be a little easier. And then I'll put this video here as well.